Millionaire woman ran out of gas. A poor mechanic towed her free and got more than he expected. Afternoon sun blazed mercilessly over the empty stretch of Highway 287 in rural Texas, creating waves of heat that danced above the cracked asphalt like liquid mirages. It was the kind of road that city folks only found themselves on by accident, a forgotten artery connecting small towns that time had passed by, where the nearest gas station could be 50 miles in either direction. Victoria Sterling had never imagined she would find herself in such a place. At 34, she was the CEO of Sterling Dynamics, a tech empire she had built from the ground up after inheriting a modest trust fund at 21. Her penthouse in downtown Dallas, her fleet of luxury cars, her private jet, all symbols of a life carefully constructed around control, efficiency, and the absolute certainty that money could solve any problem. But money couldn't make gasoline. Up here in an empty tank. Victoria stared at the fuel gauge of her pristine white Maserati Quattraport, its needle resting firmly on empty, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years: complete helplessness. The car had died with a soft wheeze 2 miles back, and she had coasted to this desolate stretch of road, where the only signs of civilization were the telephone poles marching toward the horizon and a rusty mailbox standing guard over a dirt road that disappeared into Scrubland. She had been driving back from Austin, where she just closed a deal worth $43 million. The meeting had run longer than expected, and in her eagerness to return to Dallas, she had ignored the low fuel warning, assuming she could make it to the next major city. It was a miscalculation that would have been inconsequential in her usual world of schedules and assistants and problems that solved themselves with a phone call. But here, with her cell phone showing no signal and the nearest town unknown, Victoria Sterling, master of her universe, was just another stranded motorist on a forgotten road. The heat was becoming unbearable. Victoria had removed her Armani blazer an hour ago, and now her silk blouse was beginning to cling uncomfortably to her skin. She had rationed the bottle of imported spring water from her car's mini fridge, taking small sips every few minutes, but she could feel dehydration beginning to set in. Her carefully styled auburn hair, which had cost $300 to perfect that morning, was beginning to wilt in the oppressive humidity. As the afternoon wore on, Victoria's frustration gave way to something deeper, a creeping realization of her own vulnerability. She had spent so many years insulated by wealth and success that she had forgotten what it felt like to be truly dependent on the kindness of strangers. The irony wasn't lost on her. A woman who employed over 2,000 people, who had been featured on the cover of Forbes magazine, who could buy and sell most of the companies in Texas, was now utterly powerless because of something as simple as an empty gas tank. 3 cars had passed in the last 2 hours. The first, a pickup truck loaded with hay bales, had slowed slightly but continued on when the driver, an elderly man in overalls, apparently decided that a stranded luxury car wasn't his problem. The second had been a family in an SUV, windows up, air conditioning running, the children's faces pressed against the glass as they stared at the strange sight of a businesswoman in expensive clothes, standing beside a disabled Maserati. The third car hadn't even slowed down. Victoria found herself thinking about her assistant, Jennifer, who was probably wondering where she was. By now, Jennifer would have called her cell phone a dozen times, each call going straight to voicemail. There would be emails piling up, meetings to reschedule, a dinner appointment with potential investors that she would miss. The thought of her carefully orchestrated day falling apart piece by piece added a layer of anxiety to her already mounting distress. But as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that Victoria was too stressed to appreciate, something else began to emerge from her predicament. For the first time in years, she was experiencing complete silence. No phone calls, no notifications, no constant stream of decisions that needed her immediate attention. The only sounds were the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead and the gentle whisper of wind through the tall grass that lined the roadside. It was in this moment of reluctant stillness that Victoria heard the sound of an engine approaching from the south. Unlike the previous vehicles, this one seemed to be slowing down. She turned to see an aging Ford pickup truck, its red paint faded to pink in places, black smoke puffing from its exhaust pipe as it decelerated. The truck pulled over about 20 feet ahead of her car, and Victoria felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Relief because help had finally arrived, and apprehension because she realized she had no idea how to interact with whoever was about to emerge from that weathered vehicle. In her world, problems were solved by professionals, mechanics who came to her office garage, service providers who were already paid and managed by her staff. She had never had to negotiate help from a stranger. The man who stepped out of the truck was not what Victoria had expected, though she wasn't entirely sure what she had been expecting. He was tall, probably 6'2", with broad shoulders and arms that spoke of years of physical labor. His hair was dark brown with premature streaks of gray at the temples, and his face was weathered by sun and wind in a way that suggested he spent most of his time outdoors. He wore faded jeans, work boots that had seen better decades, and a blue cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms marked with small scars, the kind that came from working with tools and machinery. But it was his eyes that caught Victoria's attention. They were a warm brown, filled with a kindness that seemed entirely genuine and a quiet intelligence that she hadn't expected. When he smiled, a slow, easy expression that reached those eyes, Victoria felt something she couldn't quite identify. It wasn't attraction, exactly, though she had to admit there was something appealing about his unpretentious confidence. It was more like recognition, as if she was seeing something authentic that she had forgotten existed. The man approached her car with an unhurried gait, his hands casually shoved into his pockets. He took in the scene, obviously expensive vehicle, the woman in business attire who clearly didn't belong on this stretch of road, the situation that was as obvious as it was predicament. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said, his voice carrying a slight Texas drawl that Victoria found oddly comforting. "Looks like you might be having some car trouble." Victoria straightened her posture, automatically slipping into the professional persona that had served her well in countless business negotiations. But even as she did, she realized how absurd it was. There was nothing to negotiate here. No deal to close, no advantage to gain. She was simply a person who needed help, and he was a person who might be able to provide it. "I'm afraid I've run out of gas," she admitted, the words feeling strange in her mouth. When was the last time she had admitted to any kind of failure, even one as mundane as this? "I was driving back to Dallas and apparently miscalculated." The man nodded, his expression sympathetic but not pitying. That stretch to Dallas can be tricky if you're not familiar with it. Not many stations between here and there. He walked around her car, taking in details with the practiced eye of someone who understood machinery. "Beautiful car, though. Don't see many of these out here." Victoria found herself studying him as he examined her vehicle. There was something about the way he moved, purposeful but unhurried, confident but not arrogant. He carried himself like a man who was comfortable in his own skin, who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. It was a quality she recognized, because it was so different from her own carefully constructed confidence, which had been built on achievements and acquisitions and the constant need to demonstrate her worth. "I'm Marcus," he said, extending a hand that was calloused and strong. "Marcus Rodriguez. I run a garage about 15 miles south of here." Victoria hesitated for just a moment before taking his hand. "Victoria," she said, then added almost reluctantly, "Victoria Sterling." If Marcus recognized the name, and given that Sterling Dynamics had been featured prominently in the Dallas business news for the past several years, he didn't show it. He simply nodded and released her hand. "Well, Victoria, I've got a tow strap in my truck and a can of gas back at the garage. I can get you running again, no problem." Victoria felt a wave of relief so strong it almost made her dizzy. "That would be wonderful. What do you charge for roadside assistance?" Marcus shrugged, already walking back toward his truck. "Don't worry about it. Just neighbors helping neighbors." As he began pulling equipment from the bed of his pickup, Victoria found herself watching him with growing fascination. In her world, nothing was free. Every service came with a price. Every favor created an obligation. Every interaction was transactional. But Marcus was offering to help her, a complete stranger with an obviously expensive car, who clearly had money without asking for anything. In return, the tow back to his garage would take them down that dusty dirt road Victoria had noticed earlier, past the rusty mailbox and into a world that was completely foreign to her. She had no way of knowing that this simple act of kindness was about to unravel everything she thought she knew about success, happiness, and what it meant to live a meaningful life. As Marcus attached the tow strap to her Maserati with practiced efficiency, Victoria Sterling, CEO of a multi-million-dollar corporation, prepared to discover that sometimes the most valuable things in life couldn't be bought, sold, or added to a quarterly earnings report. The dirt road to Marcus's garage wound through terrain that Victoria had never seen outside of movies. Rolling hills covered in scrub oak and mesquite, fields where cattle grazed in the slanted afternoon light, and horizon lines that seemed to stretch infinitely in every direction. Sitting in the passenger seat of Marcus's pickup truck while her Maserati was towed behind them, Victoria felt like she was traveling through a different country entirely. Marcus's garage sat in a clearing surrounded by live oaks, their branches heavy with Spanish moss that swayed gently in the breeze. The building itself was a testament to practical functionality over aesthetic appeal. Large metal structure with bay doors that stood open to reveal the silhouettes of vehicles in various stages of repair. Next to the garage was a small house with a wraparound porch, its white paint slightly weathered but well maintained. Flower boxes under the windows overflowed with wildflowers that Victoria couldn't identify, and a border collie emerged from beneath the porch to greet their arrival with enthusiastic tail wagging. "That's Diesel," Marcus said, noting Victoria's slight nervousness around the dog. "He's all bark and no bite." "Well, actually, he's not bark much either." As Marcus unloaded her car and positioned it in one of the garage bays, Victoria found herself studying his workspace with the same analytical attention she brought to potential business acquisitions. But instead of evaluating profit margins and efficiency ratios, she was trying to understand the man who had created this environment. The garage was immaculately organized despite its obvious age. Tools hung in precise arrangements on pegboards, each item in its designated place. The floor was clean enough to eat off, and the workbenches showed the kind of wear that came from decades of purposeful use rather than neglect. Classic rock played softly from a radio that looked like it had been broadcasting since the 1980s, and the walls were decorated with an eclectic mixture of vintage automotive posters, local high school sports schedules, and what appeared to be children's drawings held up with magnets. "Coffee?" Marcus asked, gesturing toward a small kitchenette area that had been carved out of one corner of the garage. "It's not fancy, but it's strong." Victoria accepted gratefully, realizing that she hadn't eaten or drunk anything substantial since her breakfast meeting in Austin. The coffee was indeed strong, served in a mug that proclaimed "World's Greatest Dad" in faded letters. And it was exactly what she needed. As Marcus began the process of adding gas to her car and checking her engine, "Might as well make sure everything else is running smoothly while we're at it." Victoria found herself engaging in the kind of conversation she couldn't remember having in years. There were no agendas, no networking opportunities, no underlying negotiations. Marcus asked about her drive from Austin, and she found herself describing the landscape she had passed through, the small towns with their water towers and grain Elevators, the way the light had changed as the day progressed. In return, Marcus told her about his garage, how he had inherited it from his father and grandfather before him. 3 generations of Rodriguez men had served this community, keeping vehicles running for farmers and ranchers and the occasional traveler who found themselves in need of help. He spoke about his work with genuine pride, but without arrogance, describing the satisfaction of bringing a dead engine back to life, the puzzle-solving aspect of diagnosis and repair. "I went to college," he said at one point, perhaps sensing Victoria's surprise at his eloquence. "Studied engineering at Texas A&M, but after graduation, I realized I was happier working with my hands than sitting behind a desk. Dad was getting ready to retire, and the garage needed someone to take over." He shrugged, tightening something under her hood. Not everyone understood the decision, but it felt right. Victoria found herself thinking about her own path to success. The relentless climb from junior analyst to CEO, the years of 18-hour days and sacrificed weekends and relationships that had been casualties of her ambition. When was the last time she had done something simply because it felt right, rather than because it served some larger strategic purpose? As the sun began to set, painting the garage in warm golden light, Marcus pronounced her car ready to go. "Tank's full, oil's good, tire pressure's fine. You should make it to Dallas without any trouble." Victoria reached for her purse, determined to pay him something for his time and trouble, despite his earlier refusal to discuss payment. But as she pulled out her wallet, Marcus shook his head. "I told you, don't worry about it." "But you've spent hours helping me," Victoria protested. "The gas alone must have cost $23, Marcus said with a smile. "I think I can absorb the hit." Victoria stared at him, genuinely bewildered. In her experience, people always wanted something. If not money, then connections or favors or access to her network. But Marcus seemed completely content to have helped her simply for the sake of helping. "I don't understand," she said finally. "Why are you doing this?" Marcus leaned against her car, considering the question seriously. "You know, my grandfather used to tell me that we're all just passing through this world, and the only thing that really matters is how we treat each other along the way. He said kindness was like compound interest. It grows over time, but you have to invest it to see the returns." The simplicity of the philosophy struck Victoria like a physical blow. She had spent years accumulating wealth and power, building an empire that would outlast her, creating a legacy measured in market capitalization and quarterly earnings. But when was the last time she had done something kind simply for the sake of kindness? When had she last helped someone without calculating the potential benefit to herself? As if sensing her internal struggle, Marcus added, "Besides, you looked like you needed help, and I was in a position to provide it. Sometimes it's really that simple." Victoria found herself thinking about her employees, the 2,000 people who worked for Sterling Dynamics. She knew their names from organizational charts and performance reviews, but did she know anything about their lives, their struggles, their dreams? When was the last time she had seen them as people rather than human resources to be managed and optimized? The thought led to others, cascading realizations about the isolation that success had brought her. Her penthouse apartment, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and panoramic views of Dallas, when had it become a fortress instead of a home? Her calendar, packed with meetings and conferences and networking events, when had her life become a series of obligations rather than choices? "I should get going," Victoria said, though she found herself reluctant to leave this oasis of simplicity and authenticity. "I have a dinner meeting tonight, and my assistant is probably wondering where I am." Marcus nodded, understanding. But as Victoria climbed into her car and started the engine, which purred to life with the smooth precision that only came from expert care, he knocked gently on her window. "Victoria," he said when she rolled it down, "I hope you don't mind." Me saying this, but you seem like someone who's carrying a heavy load. If you ever find yourself back this way and need to talk to someone who's not trying to sell you something or get something from you, well, he gestured toward the garage and the house beyond. I'll be here. As Victoria drove away, her rearview mirror filled with the image of Marcus standing in front of his garage, hands in his pockets, watching her disappear into the gathering dusk. She made it back to Dallas in time for her dinner meeting, fielded Jennifer's concerned calls, and managed to salvage most of her disrupted schedule. But over the following days, she found herself thinking constantly about those few hours in the garage. She remembered the feeling of drinking coffee from a chipped mug, while genuine conversation flowed as easily as water. She remembered the satisfaction in Marcus's voice when he talked about his work, the contentment that seemed to radiate from every aspect of his simple life. 2 weeks later, Victoria Sterling, CEO of a multi-million-dollar corporation, found herself making the drive back to that forgotten stretch of Highway 287. She told herself it was just to thank Marcus properly, to perhaps make a donation to his business or the local community. But deep down, she knew the truth. She was going back because for the first time in years, she had encountered someone who had seen her not as Victoria Sterling, the successful businesswoman, but simply as Victoria, a person who had needed help and deserved kindness. And in a world where everything had a price, that kind of authentic human connection was the most valuable thing she had ever encountered. The dusty road to Marcus's garage had become a pathway to something she hadn't even realized she was missing. The possibility of a life measured not in quarterly earnings, but in moments of genuine connection and simple acts of grace.
Thank you for watching this story unfold with us here on M&A The Story Unfolds. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new tale. We'd love to know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below and tell us what part of the world you're joining us from. Your support means everything. See you in the next story.